Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Men Need to Be Heard, the channel dedicated to raising awareness on the issues that men and boys face in today's society. My name is Dan, and today I'm going to be delving into a growing trend, one that could end up having profoundly negative effects on men, and in particular, fathers. One that is rife with controversy. That trend? The Republican Party's push to make child support start at conception. In recent years, there's been a growing push, especially among Republican lawmakers, to redefine child support laws in a way that requires fiscal responsibility to begin at conception rather than birth. And while this may seem on its surface appear to be a no-brainer, who would argue that men shouldn't share in the cost of pregnancy, right? The fact is, these proposals are rife with potential issues, up to and including violations of men's civil rights and the Constitution. These initiatives align with a broader conservative view on fetal personhood and parental responsibility, particularly in the wake of the Supreme Court's 2022 decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which ended up overturning Roe v. Wade. Now, I'm not getting into the particulars of that case. Wherever you stand on it, we need to set that aside for now. We also need to look at this with a broad mindset, not the narrow one that borders on outright misandry and overt sexism. What you may not know is that shortly after the case went to the Supreme Court, then Senator and current Secretary of State Marco Rubio entered a bill in Congress named the Providing for Life Act, whose principal aim, it was claimed, was to support pregnant women and families by, among other things, allowing for child support payments to begin at conception. Conspicuous, however, was any mention of fathers, the importance of fatherhood, or protecting the rights of men and fathers. And if you go and read that bill, the rights of the father not only aren't considered, but in a nutshell, are completely trampled upon. This has since led to several states entering bills of their own along the same lines, with the advocates of those bills arguing that extending child support obligations to the prenatal parent would promote fiscal responsibility, reduce economic burdens on expectant mothers, and reflect a pro-life commitment to protecting unborn children. Again, on its surface, that sounds like a noble thing. But as I'll point out, what about the men? What about the potential fathers? We need to ask, what about their rights or the potential burden being placed on them that will come into play if these laws are enacted? Sadly, as we'll show, they won't be considered. Not at all. Which is why critics such as myself are raising concerns about the legal feasibility, potential unintended consequences, and the impact overall on reproductive rights. To be clear, I'm not looking to debate the pros and cons of child support as a whole, but instead to point out how the laws, however admirable the intention might appear to be, need to have all avenues of potential issues addressed. And because of the importance of it, I'll be exploring some of the motivations, implications, and potential consequences of this policy shift and the dramatic consequences it could have on men, fathers, and most of all, children. The push to extend child support obligations to the point of conception is rooted in a broader ideological framework that it is claimed emphasizes fetal rights and parental responsibility. Many, dare I say, most Republican policymakers argue that if life begins at conception, a common belief among pro-life advocates, thus parental responsibilities, primary of which includes financial responsibilities, should also begin at that stage. And while that may be their driving force, in the end, it's only part of the equation. Wherever you stand on the debate of when life begins, it shouldn't determine whether the laws should also be implemented, at least not until we also acknowledge that it isn't just the fetus we're talking about, but the mother and potential father as well. The potential father whose rights aren't even being considered. This argument gained momentum following the Dobbs decision, which returned abortion regulation to the states and allowed many conservative legislatures to pass stricter anti-abortion laws. And by implementing prenatal child support requirements, Republican lawmakers seek to address one of the key criticisms of the pro-life policies, that they prioritize the rights of the fetus without considering the well-being of the mother. Notice what I just said there. Significantly lacking from the discussion, as I've illustrated, is that in any and all of their arguments, there isn't mention whatsoever of the well-being or rights of the father. Proponents argue that requiring fathers to contribute financially from conception would help reduce economic hardships for pregnant women, particularly single mothers who may struggle with medical expenses, prenatal care, and lost income due to pregnancy-related health complications. And I'll grant that's all a fair point, but doesn't that point also apply to potential fathers? Apparently not, because the provisions in every bill I've read fail to address that in any way. In fact, they go to great lengths within the proposed bills to refuse to acknowledge or even discuss the struggles it may place on the named father. And I say named fathers deliberately, because that's all he is, a man who has been named to be the father, and who may, in fact, not actually be the biological father. Because you see, all of those bills automatically assume the mother will name the father, the correct father, the actual father. Her word is going to be presumed to be gospel, to be absolute truth with no obligation whatsoever that she prove her assertions. More on that in a bit. Additionally, some supporters believe that this policy could deter abortion by providing pregnant women with greater financial stability and incentives to help them carry their pregnancies to term, though those that are making that argument offer no actual proof to that supposition. Essentially, the bills are long on supposition and assumption and short on actual basis of fact. And let's explore that a bit more. Several Republican-led states have introduced or passed legislation to implement prenatal child support requirements. As I mentioned, at the federal level, then Senator Rubio introduced the Providing for Life Act, which included a provision for child support payments to begin at conception. His stated objective being to redefine child support laws to align with fetal personhood principles, ensuring that expectant mothers receive financial assistance from the named father throughout pregnancy. This has led to similar proposals at the state level, many of which mirror the Providing for Life Act. In Georgia, for example, there's the Living Infants Fairness and Equality Act, otherwise known as LIFE, which includes provisions that recognize embryos and fetuses as dependents for tax purposes, laying the groundwork for potential prenatal child support legislation. Texas lawmakers have proposed similar measures, arguing that fathers should share responsibility financially for prenatal care, labor and delivery costs, and other pregnancy-related expenses. Additionally, states like Montana, Iowa, Alabama, Missouri, and South Carolina have all introduced or discussed similar proposals that would require fathers to provide financial support from the time of conception. And again, on the surface, it all sounds well and good. But when you delve into what's below the surface, a completely different picture emerges. One of the primary concerns, if not the primary concern, is establishing paternity early on in the pregnancy, something that the proposed bills don't really take into account at all. In fact, in virtually every instance, the bills allow the soon-to-be mother to essentially name any man she wishes as father. And the burden of proof is then placed not on her to provide, but instead the man she names. The man she names to be the father. The across-the-board presumption being that women know exactly who the father is and will be 100% honest in who they name. This despite the fact that roughly a third of all DNA tests of named fathers come back showing that the man the mother declared to be the father was in fact not. This is further complicated in determining fatherhood through DNA testing in utero. Unlike postnatal paternity tests, which can be conducted relatively easily if, and that's a big if, you can get a judge to order one, determining paternity before birth is far more complex and may require invasive procedures like amniocentesis or non-invasive prenatal paternity, otherwise known as NIP tests. Those can be costly and often are not widely accessible. Who's going to bear that cost? The mother? The state? No, it's going to be on the man that she named father, the man who is presumed guilty of fatherhood and upon whom the entire burden of innocence, if you will, is going to be placed. Additionally, many doctors have warned against conducting such tests due to the potential risk to the mother and fetus, however slight it might be. That alone will likely make many judges much more reluctant to order a DNA test, something they are already often reluctant to do post-birth. Additionally, legal experts question whether such laws could withstand constitutional scrutiny. Under existing child support laws, financial obligations typically begin at birth because legal parentage is firmly established at that point. Extending financial responsibilities to conception could and likely will lead to disputes over paternal rights, particularly in cases where men contest paternity or where pregnancies result from sexual violence or reproductive coercion. As I said, none of the bills that I've read in any way address the rights of the named man and the standards of proof that will be required for determining paternity in utero. Essentially, lawmakers want to leave it up to the judges who have shown invariably for decades that they believe it is in the best interest of the child to presume the man to be the father until proven otherwise. Judges who, as is case law, have shown in many decisions, forced paternity obligations onto men whom were proven beyond any doubt to be the father of the child. Judges who, by the way, benefit financially under Title 4D for assigning child support obligations to men. It begs the question, why? Why aren't the rights of men and potential fathers being addressed in any of the bills? Why are the lawmakers proposing that women have unilateral right to name any man she wishes and put him on child support with no proof required from her? And why are we allowing judges who will directly benefit financially to make those determinations? Why are there no safeguards? Why is there no consideration for the man's rights? Shouldn't the mother at the very least be required to sign an affidavit under oath listing any and all potential fathers? Shouldn't she have to list every single man she was having sex with at the time of conception so that they could all be tested to see who the actual father was? The argument against that is often that it would shame the mothers, all while ignoring the fact that by naming a man to be the father, especially when he may not actually be the father, is in fact shaming him. We should also ask, will DNA testing be mandated before a man is compelled to provide support, or will just an affidavit from the mother suffice? What are the provisions in recourse for the man if post-birth DNA testing later determines that he is not the biological father? Something none of the bills address. Will he be reimbursed for financial contributions he's already made? Will he be given interest on top of that? Who's going to pay it? The mother? The state? None of these questions are even asked, let alone answered, in any of the bills. Consider this. Current law rarely, if ever, leads to men who are victims of paternity fraud getting compensation or monies paid back to them. The argument being that it places an undue burden on the mother and thus the child. So why, knowing that, would we expect judges to view child support fraudulently paid pre-birth any differently? Will there be specific legal mechanisms in place to ensure that the defrauded man receives restitution for the support paid? Will it be mandated that he get interest accrued on top of that as well? Will his legal fees incurred to defend his rights, which could be substantial, fall on the mother, the state, or anyone? Or will he be, as so many men have been before, forced to accept financial loss with no recourse whatsoever? And what about the criminal side? Currently, in the overwhelming majority of states, paternity fraud in and of itself is not considered a criminal act. At most, it is considered to be fraud under existing statutes, but not actually considered a named criminal offense. Add to it the number of cases where the women committing that fraud were charged, let alone convicted or served prison time, are few and far between. And I ask you to think for a moment, what DA is going to criminally charge the mother of a newborn baby, one who they can prove knowingly and deliberately named a man father who wasn't, and who financially benefited from such naming of fraud? No DA in their right mind is going to do that because of the potential backlash they'd face. Yet, fraud is exactly what it is. It isn't charged now, so why should we expect it to be charged in these situations? And even if she is charged, do we really think a jury is going to convict her? And what judge is going to sentence her to prison even if she is convicted when she has a newborn baby sitting at home? The PR behind it would be a disaster for anyone that convicted the mother or sent her to prison. The answer, of course, is nothing will be done. And to anyone who thinks otherwise, I direct you to the aforementioned DNA test results, the ones that show a third of all named fathers being proven not to be the biological father. Where it is rare indeed, that the mother who committed the fraud, not just on that man, but her child as well, is held accountable. As I said, at the very least, some provisions need to be made to protect the men named, yet none of the current legislative proposals even go so far as to include provisions requiring mothers to sign affidavits listing all potential fathers during the time of conception. At a bare minimum, such measures could help ensure that financial obligations are placed on the correct individual rather than relying solely on the word of the mother. If the legal system, as is proposed in the various bills, is going to simply accept a mother's claim as the sole determining factor in assigning fiscal responsibility, it raises serious concerns about potential fraud or manipulation. And as we said, will mothers who falsely name a man as the father, particularly if they do so knowingly to target a man of higher income or social status, face any legal consequences? If not, why not? And just as important, why are those who are making these proposals not willing to discuss it? Paternity fraud is a well-documented issue, and without proper safeguards, these laws will simply create new avenues for abuse and fraud to be committed against men. Further, laws should be written or provisions added to the bill proposals to hold mothers who falsely accuse a man criminally responsible for fraud, similar to how other financial fraud cases are prosecuted. The absence of these considerations in the proposed laws suggests a significant oversight in ensuring fairness and due process for all of the parties involved. Another issue that needs to be considered and addressed is the actual costs of a pregnancy compared to raising a child. While prenatal care, delivery, and potential complications do come with some expenses, the costs associated with pregnancy are significantly lower than the long-term costs of raising a child. In fact, during the first 3 to 4 months of pregnancy, the financial burden is often negligible beyond routine checkups. Even throughout the full term, medical costs are generally limited compared to the ongoing expenses of food, clothing, housing, and education that come with raising a child. Yet in all of the proposals, the potential child support amount will not be determined based on actual costs, but rather on a percentage of the father's income, which often exceeds the direct expenses associated with a pregnancy or raising a child. This discrepancy leads to situations where child support payments can and often are substantially higher than what is actually needed for the child's well-being, effectively becoming an income redistribution mechanism rather than a needs-based financial support system. Often, instead of being based on the actual costs for food, clothing, or shelter, they're based on a standard of living, one a judge randomly determines the child should have, a standard that is often at direct odds with reality. If prenatal child support follows this same model, it could further exacerbate unfair financial burdens being placed on fathers, particularly those with higher incomes. And the bills themselves is what will be the rights of the father prior to birth. If we're going to assign financial responsibility from conception, shouldn't that man also be given full rights as a father as well? The bills sidestep this because they know it raises significant legal and ethical concerns, ones they don't want to be part of the discussion, but ones that absolutely need to be. It's a complex issue, one that requires significant thought and which should be addressed. Yet, for example, if we're going to say that men should be financially responsible from conception because mothers inherently have that same obligation, shouldn't we also acknowledge that fathers should have the same inherent rights as mothers across the board? Shouldn't we also argue that fathers should have equal say in things like the fetus's well-being, healthcare, and yes, I'll say it, equal participation in the decision-making process about a possible abortion? If we're going to say fathers need to unilaterally pay up, then shouldn't they all at least have the minimum bilateral rights to joint custody decisions? Shouldn't the law reflect that in these cases, both parents then have to agree on major life decisions for the child, including not just prenatal care, but even the right to exist? Yeah, that's a discussion no one wants to have, least of all the legislators who've made these proposals and who may be voting on them, who may be making these bills into law. And what is going to happen if, in the case of a decision over abortion, the mother wants to have it but the father doesn't and is willing to raise the child? Are we then going to force her to carry the child, pay half the expenses pre-birth, and then child support post? If not, why not? It's a legitimate question, so why are those that have proposed these laws not answering it? That is exactly how it is for men now, where the mother has all of the power to force paternity on a man while having the same full control over her rights of whether she wants to be a parent or not. In fact, under current case law in most states, even when a man chooses to use a condom to prevent becoming a father, it's perfectly legal for a woman to go into the trash and use the contents of said condom to impregnate herself, and then get 2 decades of child support from the man, even though his act of using a condom unequivocally shows he did not consent to being a father. Wherever you stand on the abortion debate, it really shouldn't be part of this issue in the sense that whether you believe abortion is okay or not, the fact is, as the laws stand now, there is nothing in place to address the rights of a man or potential father, and adding any new laws on top of that, on top of existing ones, only further exacerbate the issues. The Republican Party's push to make child support start at conception represents a significant shift in family policy. And while, as I've said, on its surface it appears to be a good idea, until and unless we have significant conversation and debate, not to mention actually address the potential issues within the framework of the potential bills, well, it must be opposed at all costs, at least until all of the concerns that we've raised have been addressed. While one might think it's commendable to have men pay half the costs of pregnancy in utero, something I think most men already do, I might add, unless protections and provisions are put into place to protect the rights of men equal to those already granted to women, then it's just another example of the ongoing attack on masculinity and fatherhood that the Republican Party, in fact, both parties, have demonstrated for decades now. While these proposals seek to address financial inequities for pregnant women and to promote a supposedly pro-life agenda, they also raise complex legal, economic, and ethical questions. And while proponents and the Republican Party want you to focus on the lipstick they're putting on the pig, they don't want you to even acknowledge that there's a pig at all, the pig of child support. Ultimately, any policy change must balance ideological commitments with practical considerations. For far too long, the rights of men, the rights of fathers, have been abused, essentially tossed aside in order to facilitate agendas and create division. Without safeguards ensuring fairness for accused fathers, such as requiring paternity testing, fraud protections, and reimbursement mechanisms, these policies not only won't solve anything, they'll create new legal and financial injustices. Perhaps it's time politicians actually acknowledge that fact. So what do you think? Should these bills be passed into law? Should men have to pay child support from conception? Should mothers be forced to name all the potential fathers? And do you think men should have parental rights in utero? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video and learned something from it, could you do me a favor and like it and share it with others? It really helps the channel to grow and to raise awareness on the issues that men and boys face in today's society. This is Dan saying thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.